please do so. There's a few books on display there that will be drawn at the end or the conclusion of this lecture. So this morning I'll be presenting the Battle of Maryang-San from the 3rd to the 8th of October 1951.
I should tell you, you've got a 3 RAR member here.
Ah, very good. I think Bob, you're in the 3 RA as well. Very good. So we've got a few members of the battalion. So I'll try to be as accurate as I can. But if I have got something wrong, please do so. Ask and interject.
I wasn't at the battle.
I wasn't in the battle.
So I just want to draw your attention to the quote that's on that front screen. This is coming from Robert O'Neill, who's the Australian official historian of the Korean War. And he describes this battle as Australia's finest feat of arms in the Korean War. Now, obviously everyone has heard of Cap Yon in April 1951, where the battalion received a US citation. There are some scholars who would disagree with Robert O'Neill, but having studied the battle and looking at both battles in comparison, I tend to agree that it best represents Australian aggression, strategy, tactics, operational level in the Korean War. So hopefully you'll come to the same conclusion. Obviously there'll be time for discussion at the end. So that's the outline of the presentation. Just quickly touch on the pre-battle situation from Army, Corps to divisional level. We'll look at the brigade plan. We'll look at the makeup of the 3 RAR prior to the battle of 1951. We'll also just have a quick look at the CPVF, and that was part of the People's Liberation Army. There's the Chinese, the enemy at that time. A quick overview of Operation Commando, which was the whole operation. But you can see there that the Operation Commando itself was divided up or had phases. You can see that between the 3rd and the 4th of October you had Commando 1, and then the 5th to the 7th was Commando 2. And I'll explain why that had occurred. And lastly, we'll do a battle assessment. So just going back to that high level of division, you can see there that the brigade was part of the 1st Commonwealth Division, led by Major General A.H.J. Castles. Now, Castles itself was highly respected as a divisional commander, had enormous amount of experience, and was seen by many of his brigade and battalion commanders as highly qualified for the position. So it was well liked and well respected. It came under the US 1st Corps, and the division itself was made up of 3 infantry brigades, 25th Canadian, 28th, which we'll be spending most of our time on, and the 29th Infantry, the British Brigade. Now, the political environment at the time, you can see that between July and September, the actual division held a certain ground at the boundary at the front. And because of the diplomatic situation, they were conducting a number of active patrols. The movements of the division at the time was there to support the political situation. So it was very much about the military supporting the political and the diplomatic situation that was occurring at the time. That'll just give you a sense of the front. You can see we're not just talking about one line. You can see here there are a number of fronts emerging. You have the Kansas line, the Wyoming line. Now the area that we're going to be focusing on is just this area just north of Seoul. Okay, so just this area here. And that's the Yalu River flowing there. th Commonwealth Brigade, again as part of the 1st Commonwealth Division, led by Brigadier General George Taylor, again a well-respected and highly experienced staff officer. He was a practitioner of mission command. Many of you may know the theory of and the practice of mission command. It came from the German army prior to World War II. The German word is Aufgestaktik, and some of the practitioners of mission command that you're probably very familiar with would be Erich von Manstein and Rommel. It's very much about giving autonomy to either the company commanders or platoon commanders. So it's giving direction, but allowing the field commander to take initiative. So Brigadier General Taylor was very much a practitioner of mission command, and you can see this happening in the course of this battle. So the brigade comprised of 3 RAR, the 1st Battalion of the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, and the 1st Battalion of the King's Own Scottish Borderers. So take note of the acronym, because I'll be referring to these. Oh, sorry. Pressed the wrong button. I apologise. So if you can just keep a note of 1 KOSI and 1 KOSB, because I'll be using the shortened versions. Okay. But I'll keep reminding you as we go through. So supporting the brigade, we had the 16th Field Regiment, that's the Royal New Zealand Artillery. So 3 batteries of 25 pounders. And there was direct fire support from the 8th King Royal Irish Hussars with their Centurion tanks. So this just gives you an idea on the ground prior to the battle. So this is in September. You can see here, that's the Yalu River. And you get a rough idea of the active patrolling that was occurring that 3 RAR were involved in. So that's just a narrower focus of the larger map that you saw previously. Okay, 3 RAR. Led at the time by Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hassett, RMC graduate 38, who was wounded in action at Tobruk and later seen service in the Pacific as a staff officer. He assumed command in July. And what's interesting is that Taylor had a high regard for the battalion, especially after Capion in April. But what's another interesting point is that the makeup of the battalion had changed drastically between April to October because of the individual release system. This was the first and only time that the Australian Army had introduced the relief system, individual release system. So the first and only time. And I think they learnt their lessons. So obviously in Vietnam, this was not the case. So each battalion was marched in and out as a battalion, not as individual soldiers. So to give you an idea, in September alone, we had 103 new soldiers marched in and 128 marched out. So by the time you went from April to September, the battalion looked incredibly different. It was different makeup, different soldiers. You also had what Frank Hassett had to deal with was a different mix within the battalion. So you had from veterans through K-Force, so World War II veterans. Most of those veterans were senior or junior NCOs, but he also had a number of young, new RAR recruits. And as you know, ARR, the Royal Australian Regiment, was enacted in 1949. So we're talking about the early phases of the Royal Australian Regiment itself as a unit. So you had a number of young regular soldiers that are coming through with a mix of veteran or senior NCOs who served in World War II, and many of the junior officers, so those platoon leaders, were RMC graduates. Any questions at this stage? I'm happy to stop as we go, but if there's anything, just feel free to interject. That's Lieutenant Colonel Hassett on the day he took over as commander of 3RA, that's in July. So within 3RA you had 4 infantry companies. A company led by Captain Jim Shelton, B company by Captain Henry Nichols, quite an amount of experience. He was part of the 67th Battalion, which was the predecessor to RAR, 3RA. Charlie Company or C Company led by Jack Girk. So Jack Girk as a major was 2IC to Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hassett. Quite an experienced commander. And then Delta Company led by Jack Harding. So as most battalions, you had a lot of support companies attached to the battalion. As you can see there, an interesting point, which I think is very significant here, is that right up to the battle in early October, the battalion was only 70% in strength. So I need you to remember that, because as we walk through the battle, what those soldiers did, knowing that many of those companies and those platoons were under strength, was incredible. When you think about what those soldiers had done over the course of the days. Just a quick picture there. I'm not too sure the date on that one, but it's circa to the battle. Again, just give you a quick outline of the battle readiness of 3RAR. So again, equipped with the 1937 webbing pattern. Each rifleman carried the Enfield. So supporting them were the Bren and the Owen machine guns. The machine gun platoons had the Vickers, which was used for suppressing fire and supporting fire. You had the 17-pounder anti-tank. And a key advantage over the Chinese were the communications. So the Australian companies, as with the British, had not only the wireless, so not only did they have cable, so they threw cable out, but they also had the wireless. So that was a key advantage, and you can see how that was being used extensively during this battle by battalion HQ and also by company commanders for their platoons.
I've got a question on that.
Yep.
I noticed the 303 was still a standard weapon at that late stage, but at the end of the Second World War, they were using automatic weapons.
They had the Owen, so the Owen machine gun, but every rifleman had the 303. So there was I'm not too sure the number of Owen machine guns per platoon.
Two per section, I think.
Thank you.
Two per section.
Two per section.
Two per section.
So 6.
So what you'll see is the nature of the battle the Owen machine gun was a high advantage in taking some of those trenches.
Just on that subject, I was thinking about this when I was researching the battle before coming today, but the Australian Army was still using essentially the same weapons they had used in the Second World War.
Correct.
But in a way that was quite a good thing, because they might not have been perhaps the most sophisticated. They were incredibly robust and reliable, and you needed that in those conditions.
Correct, thank you. That's a good point, yes. So as you might not be aware, but the Korean Institute is holding an exhibition just across the road here. So one of our members actually went along and sent me some photos. So this is just 2 photos that I thought I'll add to the presentation. And it's being held right now. So we made contact, well, they made contact with us when they heard that this lecture was on. So feel free to, if you want, later this afternoon, make your way over there. It's just, I'm not too sure. Sorry?
It's only open on weekdays.
Only open on weekdays, okay, sorry, I'll take that back. Yeah, so these are just a couple of photos there, just to give you an idea.
I'm sorry, was that called the Korean Institute?
Yeah, John, what was that?
Korean Cultural Centre.
Korean Cultural Centre.
Yeah, 255 Elizabeth Street,
Okay.
almost diagonally opposite where we are now.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so quickly look at the enemy. So the Chinese People's Volunteer Force was created by Mao, launched its first offensive on the 27th of October 1950. It was actually part of the People's Liberation Army. When they crossed over the border, they removed all insignia. So they wanted to be treated as, well, they wanted to be seen internationally as a volunteer force, not part of the People's Liberation Army. So the moment they crossed the North Korean-Chinese border, the Yalu River, they removed all military insignia because politically that was probably to safeguard any repercussions on the diplomatic front. So they would not be regarded as an army, but a volunteer force. And you can see there that in April, they already launched their 5th campaign of their 5th offensive campaign. Unfortunately for the commanding chief, General Peng Duo, he was severely impeded by the political machine in China. So not only was he impeded strategically, but micromanaged at the tactical level as well. Initially, they would use their volume, their mass, to overwhelm the enemy. Later on, once the UN forces started to dig in, the Chinese obviously reciprocated, and they started to become a lot more, started to use a lot more positional warfare, and started to dig in themselves. So they started to learn that running and rushing the enemy was not always an effective strategy or tactic. So they started to learn as the UN forces started to become stronger and they consolidated their positions, the Chinese reciprocated. One of the biggest problems they had, obviously, is that they had very little communication capabilities, and they really didn't understand how to use the position, the defensive positions, as the UN forces had done in creating those killing zones. So, to be a bit more specific, to draw it down to the actual battle themselves, the 571st Regiment was the regiment that the 25th Brigade was attacking. They were highly illiterate, these are just peasants. It was highly politicised. It was made up of 3 infantry battalions. And the preferred weapon was the PPSHM submachine gun. And I'll show you a picture in a moment. Very robust weapon. And go back to your earlier point. just gives you an idea of the positions held by the Chinese. So this is the actual map of the battlefield itself. You can see that the brigade was holding and forming up in this area. So this is north and south. Just orientate yourself. That's north, south. You see that the high ground was occupied by the Chinese, and these are valleys going across. Okay, so you get a sense of, so that's north and south forming up, and the high ground. So that's the Chinese preferred weapon of choice there. They did have a rifle as well, so each man carried a rifle, but the machine gun was a bit, I'm not too sure of the ratio within a equivalent to a section or platoon, but they were quite prevalent on the battlefield. Okay, Operation Commando was proposed by Lieutenant General John O'Daniel, who's the US 1st Corps Commander. He described it as a moderate advance. It's only 10 kilometres. The main objective here was to seize those key terrain features and to remove the enemy's ability to observe lines of communications. So they needed to take that high ground just north of the river. So the Americans obviously thought if they can take that high ground, they can use that position, that military position, to help them with their diplomatic and political objectives. So at a divisional level, remember the 25th was the Canadian Brigade, that would take the Sammamichon River, and the 28th was the Commonwealth Brigade, which 3RAR was attached to, would capture 355, which was Maryang-San, or better known as Little Gibraltar, and the key terrain to the east. Good thing about the brigade, it had divisional US artillery support. And you would see that this was used, especially later in the phases of the battle. So the divisional plan, 2 phases. So 28th Brigade, reinforced by the 1st Battalion Royal Northumberland Fusiliers and 2 tank squadrons, would capture 355, which is Maryang-San, and then its key features south and east. And phase 2, the 25th of the Canadian Brigade, supported by the 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, would capture the line overlooking the Sammamichon tributary. And phase 3, they would consolidate their positions. Now, Brigadier General Taylor decided to develop his plan according to those phases as well, because he thought that would be the best way of ensuring that his movements would also have the support firepower. So you can see here, this is where the terms Commando 1 and Commando 2 have come from. So the overall operation was called Commando, Operation Commando, and at the brigade level, Taylor decided to have 2 phases, which was Commando 1 and Commando 2. So you can see that he tasked the British battalions to take Hill 355, which is Maryang-San, and he tasked the 3RAR to take 317. Hill 317 is Maryang-San. Okay, so Hill 317 is Maryang-San. Okay, this just gives you an idea of the objectives of Commando 1. Okay, so the forming up area is just south of the bend. So the Shropshire Light Infantry would come across and move up the slopes, taking Hill 227. The King's Own southern Scottish border, would move directly onto Hill 355. 3RR would take Hill 199 and give supporting fire for the Scottish borderers to take. The main objective was 355, which is Maryang-San. So that was Commando 1. The next objective was Commando 2, and you can see there that Hill 355 would be captured, Hill 227 would be captured, 3ARR would be tasked to move along the river and to take the northern ridges, and their objective would be 317, which is Maryang-San, and the Hinge, and 217, with support from the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers coming across the valley. So they were the two objectives. That were two Commando 1 and Commando 2. Any questions about that? Okay, so that was the plan. Obviously plans do change, but you'll see how things have changed, but that was the plan. Okay, what you see there in the background, that's Maryang-San. Okay, that's looking north. That's Maryang-San. So that's Hill 317. Hill 317. That's Maryang-San. Quite a steep, conical shaped ridge, or mountain actually, the ridge running off it. And if we go back to the earlier point, Brigadier General Taylor allowed his battalion commanders to form their own plan. So this is mission control, this is mission command. Okay, I'll give you the overall plan, but each battalion commander then decided they were tasked to create their own manoeuvres, their own manoeuvre scheme. So the one thing that Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hassett did, which I believe was the best thing that he did, the best decision, was to actually consult with the Americans, who on 3 different occasions unsuccessfully tried to take Hill 317. So he consulted with the Americans. He decided that he would not repeat the failures of the Americans, which was to attack during the day and to attack up the southern slopes. So what he decided to do was to veer to the north and attack from the rear, and what he called running the ridges, which he was exposed to during his time as a staff officer in the Pacific. So the plan was to cross the Yalu River Valley under darkness, seize 199, that was the first part of the plan, to give supporting fire to 217, and then to run the ridge and take Hill 317 and the Hinge. Okay, so this was just the night before the actual assault. You can see the forming up. So you see each battalion was ready to move into position.
Is the river frozen, or is it that time of year?
Sorry, say again. Sorry.
Is the river frozen, or is it actually
October? No, I don't think it was frozen at that stage. No. So there's the Scottish borderers moving. The Shropshire Light Infantry will be moving across and ready to take 227. So that's just the night before, that's the 2nd of October, just forming up. Okay, the 3rd of October, the start of the battle. 0300 hours, Lieutenant Jim Hughes, 4th Platoon, Bravo Company move across to the valley to secure 199. The rest of the company would step off an hour later. It was heavy fog was a great advantage for those manoeuvres. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett gave the order that the movement will be single file with 50 yards between each man. The reasoning was that if the Chinese did see any movement, they wouldn't see a bulk of men marching off together. They would see individual soldiers and therefore would not feel that they were being threatened in any way. So it was under darkness, heavy fog, single file, 50 yards between each man. Because it was dark, some of the soldiers actually had white tape on their backs, others had rope, so they wouldn't get lost. Now, considering the terrain, it was pretty tough to navigate, and you'll see that later on. Some of the companies went off axis of assault, went a little bit off centre, but you got to remember it's a fairly barren area. There weren't too many landmarks, and we're talking about darkness and mist and fog and so forth. So it was very difficult to navigate on the ground. Okay, so that just gives you an idea here of what we're talking about. You can see that the British battalions were moving into place. Bravo Company were attacking Hill 199. So with support of artillery fire, Bravo Company advanced to contact westward. Following a brief action, and it was relatively brief, they did rush the position. 3 Australian wounded and 5 enemy killed. I think by I didn't put that in there, by about 0800 hours they had captured Hill 199. So it was a very brief advance and encounter with the enemy. Alpha Company took over from Bravo and they began to dig in. And what was interesting, the Chinese cannon did not eventuate. So the Chinese actually just let that position go. They did not want to retake Hill 199, sorry. Okay, just a picture here of some 3 RAR members. You can see the Brent machine gun and the Enfield rifle. It also gives you a good idea of the landscape, a sense of it anyway. Okay, so while 3 Bravo Company was securing Hill 199, the Shropshire Battalion was tasked to clear the spur line south of Hill 355. And remember, they needed to capture Hill 227. So 0600 hours, they secured 208, which is just south of 355, with the support of the tanks. The tanks couldn't really move as far as they would want to because they encountered some mines. This is a picture of members of the 1st Battalion Scottish Borderers. So remembering that the Shropshire had taken 208, they still have not yet taken 217, which was their final objective. The Scottish Borderers were tasked to take Maryang-San, Cowan-San at 355. So they attacked at dawn. The terrain had impeded their advance. There was a sustained enemy artillery mortar fire to support them, from the enemy. There was machine guns from Hill 199 to support the Borderers, that's from the north, shooting south. However, the Scottish Borderers could not and did not take their objective. Now that, in some respects, undermined the divisional plans. So Major General Castle had to rejig the timings because that that those two battalions not taking their objectives has now impacted on the divisional plans in total. That is a Centurion gun sighting in sights. That's a Vickers firing across the valley. So now we come to the next day, which is the 4th of October. In desperation, because both the Scottish Borderers and the Shropshire battalions could not take their objective, Taylor went to requested in a nice way, I don't believe it was an order, but he requested, according to what I read, that Colonel Hassett support the two British battalions. He was reluctant. Remember, they were only 70% at strength at this stage. So you can understand, he still has not yet had his men complete their objective, which was to take Maryang-San. So Hassett reluctantly, but ordered Charlie Company to support the two British battalions. And obviously he went to his most experienced commander, which is Major Kirk. Okay, so this just gives you an idea of Charlie Company's movements on that day, that morning, sorry. So this was initiated at 0400 hours. Initially it was led by 7th Platoon, followed by 8th Platoon of Charlie Company. So you can see how they moved along the ridge line. Okay, taking a number of Chinese positions. Now, at the same time, those blue arrows, so you had the Shropshire Regiment battalion coming up the slopes. That was the light, that was the Shropshire, and you had the Scottish Borderers coming up from, that blue line there, you can see that from the south was the Scottish Borderers, and then you had the light infantry, the Shropshires coming from that side. So you've had the two platoons, Charlie Company along the ridge, and the two British battalions coming up the south. So that just gives you the text of what I just said. Okay. You can see there at 0700 hours, Piers and platoon ready for the assault. So they formed up at 0400. Again, mist, fog, darkness, formed up, and just on dawn, they initiated the assault. Now, one thing that we can read out of this was that Charlie Company used a combination of speed and surprise and aggression to achieve their objective. And you're going to hear me say that a number of times. The success of this battle was based on those three elements of manoeuvre: speed, surprise and aggression. Going back to the weapons, the Owen machine gun was in constant use, as you can imagine. Shooting from the hip, you had the Brand gun shooting from the hip. There was no time to just sit down and go prone. Prone position. All right, they were shooting from the hip the whole way. Okay, remembering again, I'll make another point and reinforce the point that we are talking about understrength platoons, understrength companies at this time. Okay, so you can see there it was quite aggressive. The Chinese were caught off guard. Why? Because the Chinese believed that the attack was coming from the south up the slopes. They were not expecting enemy, well, in our case, the UN forces, coming along the ridges. It was quite a surprise to the Chinese. So Again, speed, surprise, aggression, with the support of fire support, so artillery, Centurion tanks firing from the slopes. Okay, that's a picture of Hill 355. This is Maryang-San, Little Gibraltar. So that was the final objective. The final objective. That's looking down the river. That's the view. That's the view of the Scottish borderers. On the same day as 355 was captured, the Shropshire's advanced to their final objective. It was 227. Again, they came under heavy mortar and automatic fire, but they achieved their objective. Commando 1 was complete. Okay, this one that just gives you, I guess, an idea of what's to come, what has happened and what is to come. So you can see here, Maryang-San, you can see how Charlie Company took around the ridges, the Scottish borderers and the light infantry from the slopes. We're now moving into Commando 2. So Commando 2, its objective was to take Maryang-San and the Hinge and 217. And this was tasked to 3 RAR with the support of the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers. So this was Commando 1. That has now been achieved. We're moving into Commando 2, the next phase of this battle. So moving, you can see how both Delta Company, D Company, Bravo Company, B Company, and then again Charlie Company later on to support those two depleted companies. Okay, I've just said this, captured 317, supported by the 1st Battalion Royal Northumberland Fusiliers. There was a significant massive artillery bombardment and airstrikes preceding this particular phase of the battle. Chinese reinforced this complex with 2 battalions of the 575th Regiment. So on the 5th of October, the forward companies, and in this case it was B Company and supported by D Company, would move across the valley, and there were a number of small, what they call small features along the ridge, moving up towards Maryang-San. And each ridge was designated a sign. They had Victor Uniform Tango, and each one had to be taken. So Battalion HQ was situated at 199. Remember that was captured at Commando 1. And then supporting Battalion HQ was Charlie Company. So you had Frank Hassett and Major Gerg together on Hill 199, overlooking the next phase, which was the northern ridges, moving from east to west. Okay, so this just gives you an idea of the terrain. And you can see the number of small features that 3RR had to take. So here's Battalion HQ on Hill 199, and you had Charlie Company supporting Battalion HQ. B Company and supported by D Company would be moving across and attacking the enemy along the ridge line. Remembering that the Chinese were expecting the enemy from the southern slopes. They were not expecting UN forces along the ridge. So all their entrenchments were focused to the south. So 0600 hours on the 5th of October, the Northumberlands advanced across the Col Jeannery Valley, across the foothills of 317 and Hill 217. Chinese positions were heavily bombarded, but the Northumberlandese were repulsed after numerous attacks. So at this point, the Northumberland Fusiliers were stalled. They were, at this time, just protecting themselves against the Chinese firing down the slopes into the valley. So just remember that, because I'll come back to that in a moment. So we have a battalion stalled in the valley. B Company were to capture Whiskey, which was the first of the features, and they did so quite quickly. D Company moving on the main axis, they approached Victor. Now at this point the fighting was pretty heavy, and you can see that one of the company commanders, Hardiman, was wounded. He was evacuated, and Lieutenant Young took over command. So in taking Whiskey Victor, 30 Chinese killed, 2 Australian killed. Again, we go back to that speed, surprise and aggression had won the day. Okay, this just gives you an idea of that particular text and the movements. Taking note of the features moving along the ridgeline. Okay, and in this area right here, you had the Northumberland Fusiliers, which were stalled just at the bottom of the slopes. Okay, so Northumberland Fusiliers just stalled at the bottom of the slopes there. But in some respects, a diversion, while the Chinese didn't know what was happening along the ridges coming from the east. So, as to support the Northumberlands, Lieutenant Colonel Hassett ordered Captain Shelton's A Company to advance northeast and just to position themselves just 1,000 metres from Hill 317. And that, again, not only to support the Northumberlands, but also, again, to reinforce to the Chinese that that's where the main attack will occur. So the Chinese, at this stage, believed that that's the main attack. They did not realise that 2 companies were coming across the ridge. Now, we've got to remember, this is an understrength company, understrength platoon. They already had marched a number of kilometres at night. They've already taken a number of small features, so they lost their company commander. So Bravo Company at this point was fairly depleted and exhausted. Lieutenant Colonel Hassett decided to support and told Bravo Company just to dig in, and Charlie Company was ordered across the valley, around, and to march through Delta Company and Bravo Company to take the next assault, and that is Maryang-San. Okay, and this just gives you an idea of those particular movements that I've just described. So you can see that Alpha Company is down at the bottom here. Here's the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers. Okay, trying to take 217. Remember, they're stalled. So they're just I guess supporting what's happening here. They're not doing much. Alpha Company's supporting their brother companies, assaulting along the ridge line. Charlie Company's now moved forward. They've moved through Delta and Bravo. Bravo's lost his company commander. They're depleted. Delta Company is coming close to being exhausted. So those men have been fighting along those small positions. Then you've got Charlie Company, who are rested after being involved in Commando 1. They've rested. Now they've been ordered to take that next phase, which was to take Hill 317, which is Maryang-San. Okay, so they've moved through and they're positioning to take Maryang-San. Okay, that's another picture of Maryang-San. Give you an idea, that's Maryang-San there. Just at the pointed hill. This is a shot of the Chinese looking down the slopes. Okay, we're coming to that Commando 2, but third phase of Commando 2. So the first phase was to take the features, X-ray, whiskey, uniform and tango. They've all been taken by B Company and D Company. We're now coming into the second phase of Commando 2, was Charlie Company forming up to take Maryang-San and then eventually the Hinge and 217. So you can see here that Lieutenant Pearce, 7th Platoon. Now we're down to 21 men. Okay, what was interesting here is that the taking of Maryang-San was a lot easier than the Australians had planned. Because of the heavy bombardment, the Chinese virtually gave it up. So by the time the Australian forces had taken those pits, most of the men were either dead, dazed or fled. So this wasn't the major battle they were expecting. The next particular manoeuvre would be costly to the Australians. So Maryang-San was taken quite lightly. That's a New Zealander 25 pounder, giving that artillery support. So we get to the point where we've got to start to consolidate the ridges. So we've taken Maryang-San. Okay, remember that we've taken the whole ridge line east of Maryang-San. Lieutenant Pembroke's 9th Platoon was ordered to capture Sierra. Sierra was just in the north between Maryang-San and the Hinge. You see a photo in a moment. And they did so quite easily, because they did it very early in the morning. The Chinese were not prepared. They were still having their breakfast. And again, you can see the Owen machine gun being used effectively. And again, we go back to the three elements of manoeuvre, speed, surprise and aggression had won the day again. But I want you to also remember that all that aggression takes a lot out of a soldier. So we're talking about a lot of movement, a lot of speed, a lot of aggression over 2 days. And some rest at night, but not a lot. So these soldiers at this point are getting quite exhausted. So just again says a lot about the Australian soldier at this point in time, because they've been on the move constantly, moving and taking Chinese fortified pits. Okay, sorry about it, it's a bit blurry, I do apologise for that. For some reason it didn't come through very well. You can see here this is the actions of Alpha Company and the Royal Northumberland Fusiliers. So they're making their way up the slopes. This is just a tactical map of the taking of the Hinge. This proved to be quite a decisive battle and quite a ferocious battle. So where the 3RR believed that Maryang-San would be quite difficult, it proved to be quite easy because a lot of the Chinese actually gave up Maryang-San. However, the Chinese were not so easy to give up the hinge. This became a very pivotal battle and quite ferocious. Everything I've read about the hinge, we're talking about fierce hand-to-hand combat. The use of the bayonet, the use of the butt of the rifle, spades. This is real hand or close combat, close quarter combat between Australian soldiers and Chinese soldiers. So it's quite ferocious. You can get a sense of the two platoons up, one platoon down, back. Okay, so this happened over the course of the 6th and the 7th of October. So B Company would move through Charlie Company. Remember that B Company was quite depleted early on. They rested. Charlie Company came through B Company. They took Maryang-San. Charlie Company were told to dig in at Maryang-San. Bravo Company has now moved through Charlie Company and now in order to take the hinge, with the support of, I think it's 8th Platoon Charlie Company. So you had B Company and the support of 8th Platoon Charlie Company to take the hinge. Quite a ferocious battle. But because Lieutenant Colonel Hassett realised that his men were at that point in time where they were exhausted, ammunition was getting close to being exhausted, depleted, he ensured that this particular attack would be heavily supported with artillery, and he was working very closely with the battery commander of the Royal New Zealand artillery batteries, Major Roxbury, sorry, I think it's a Major Roxbury, who was working very closely to make sure that artillery support fire was well coordinated and would give those infantry assault the best chance of succeeding. That's back at Battalion HQ, bring back the wounded. Okay, so the assault occurred. So you see 4th and 6th Platoon move forward with 5th Platoon in the rear. Initial attack happened not at dawn. So where in the past the attacks happened pre-dawn, so you had the cover of darkness, Lieutenant Colonel Hassett decided to give the attack the best possible chance of succeeding. He decided to launch the attack post-dawn, in daylight, so artillery fire could be most effective. Obviously it exposed the platoons to incoming fire, but in the end it proved to be the right decision. Because that artillery fire and the fire from the tanks was extremely effective, So initial attack started at 0800 hours. There was a second attack at 0845, and by 0930 the hinge was ours. And really, again, it comes back to speed, surprise, aggression, but in this case, supporting fire. It was extremely effective. The Chinese realised that the taking of the hinge was quite a significant, had a significant impact on their abilities to control the terrain. So they attempted two or three significant counterattacks, but they were repulsed. So in summation, I guess, coming to the end, Brigadier General Taylor's assessment, you could read that yourself, but you can see there that he was extremely pleased with the work of 3RAR and made mention those 4 company commanders and their leadership during this battle. The unfortunate thing with Brigadier General Taylor is that immediately after this battle he was removed from command. There is some controversy around why. Some believe that it was undermined by his battalion British senior commanders. They didn't like him. The irony of all this is that the battalion commander of the Scottish Borderers took over as Brigadier General, and in the battalion diaries there was no mention of support by 3RR to take Hill 355. So it's quite controversial. So if you were to read the Scottish Borderers Battalion diaries, there's no mention of support given by Charlie Company to take Hill 355. So they've taken all the credit. So there's a bit of politics going on there within the brigade immediately after this battle. So it's very unfortunate that he was sent home. Just to give you an idea of the awards, so that just gives you a list of the
Who were the DSOs? Battalion Commander and the Senior?
Yes,
senior
yeah,
company commander?
that's right.
Yeah, good.
And then the last words from Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hassett, just to give you again a sense of his assessment of the battle. And I'll just go back again to those three elements of manoeuvre: speed, surprise, aggression, and you know, the superb leadership, not only at the battalion level, but also at the company and platoon level, and the coordinated fire support. So all those elements of battle tactics, again, won the day. And that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I'd like to make an observation. In the final chapter of Michael Pembroke's excellent book called Korea, he devotes the final chapter to his father activities, Lieutenant Pembroke. Actual action in the assault of Maryang-San. And whilst he doesn't bog into detail, he paints a very concise picture of the final closure onto Maryang-San and the horror of the Chinese counter-bombardment that followed. And in that particular action, Pembroke got his MC. Pembroke had been the Sword of Honour winner of his class at Duntroon, and I had the privilege of serving with him in Headquarters Training Command when I was the editor of the Manual of Land Warfare. That's my observation.
Thank you very much for that. John?
Fusiliers were 4th Battalion added to the Brigade. Were they properly coordinating with Brigade, or they just rushed in at the last moment?
No, from my understanding, they were in comms with...
No, not in comms, I mean, but coordinated, used to working, because every brigade, like every football team, works differently. Had they been coordinated properly, or just thrown in and said... My understanding is that they were coordinated.
But they weren't from that. They weren't from the brigade. They were from one of the other brigades.
Oh yeah, they were from the other
and
brigade.
They were tasked in support.
That's correct. Yeah, they were from 29th Brigade. Yeah. Yes.
I think one of the things that occurs to me...
Just go back. You want to go back to a map or something?
Sure.
Maybe I'll just go back, sorry, I'll just go back to that map there.
Actually, it's good that you've made a point of that, because that was probably the one I would have asked to bring up. Because what it brings home to me is the, you talked about the sort of the flexibility and the way in which we were able to structure things like mission tactics, and also when the Germans had that concept of the Kampfgruppe, you know, the idea that you threw together a unit of what you needed in order to achieve an objective. And I often thought that the Australians kept a battalion structure that very easily enabled them to do that, and a lot of other armies didn't. So you always had your 4 relatively small rifle companies, but you could supplement them if you needed. or you could move units around, or you could throw two companies together, and it made it a lot easier to do. That, I mean, that's a masterpiece to me. It's what I often think of when you see a really good battle plan. I often think of the term elegant simplicity, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's a good way of describing it. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Rob, I think the thing too with Commando 1 was that Hassett really only had 2 rifle companies to do it.
Yeah.
Because C Company was tasked in a support and reserve role, and D Company was either the brigade or the division or reserve.
Yeah.
And so he had to combine all those things with massive artillery and air support plus the tank support.
That's right. Thanks, Mike. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a question. Was there much air support? There was a lack of.
There was air support, not used throughout the battle. I'm just trying to. I did have a note.
The Chinese didn't have any surveillance to see that they were coming the wrong way or looking the wrong way.
My understanding, I could be wrong, but I thought there was a lot more. There was air support called to take the hinge.
Because there's a lot less.
Not necessarily in Commando 1, but more so Commando 2. So I'm just trying to find. I know I've got. So you can see here. In taking Maryang-San,